and we will talk about evaluations and how we obtain those evaluations and the parents' right and responsibilities. So without further ado, Maggie, if you want to take it from here, thank you again for being here. For taking the time to be here and giving this presentation. I know a lot of families will benefit from it. And again, if you have any questions during the training, if you guys want to put it in the comment section, and we will get to it at the end. Or I think, Maggie, if you want to pause during the live, that's that's really up to you if you want to answer when those come in. So yeah, write your questions down, and at the end we will have a little bit more conversation. Okay, so take it away.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. I
Yeah.
appreciate everybody having me today to learn a little bit about evaluations and eligibility. And like Michelle was saying, if you do have questions, go ahead and stop me. And that's okay if you put them in the chat, or there's a raise hand feature button at the bottom of our Google Meet today. And if you don't want to interrupt, you can just hit that raise hand button and I will know to stop. There's a lot of different components along the way of evaluation. So if you might forget something, by the end, that's okay. Let's go ahead and dive into that so that we get all of your questions answered and you feel comfortable with this process by the end of our webinar today. And if not, the lovely liaisons at InSource will be able to continue to support you. So like Michelle said, my name is Maggie Hampton. I am a special ed technical assistant specialist at the Indiana Department of Education's Office of Special Education. So my role is really to support schools and families and parents with the special education process and provide tools and resources to make it make sense, because there is just a lot of details. So today we're talking about evaluations and eligibility. So we're going to go through these steps here today of that process. We'll start with requesting an evaluation. There's a couple different types of evaluation that can occur, so we'll break those down for you. We also want to talk about your parent rights and also responsibilities as your child might be going through the evaluation process. And then once that evaluation is complete, the last step is to determine eligibility, whether it's for the first time, you've never had an eligibility and an evaluation, an IEP, all that. So we might be figuring out this for the first time, or determining eligibility for a student who maybe already has an IEP and we're doing a reevaluation for more resources. And at the end, I always like to leave you guys with some resources to continue learning. So we will look at some of those. All right. So let's just start at the beginning with requesting an evaluation. So Article 7 is our state Indiana rules for special education, and they list 13 different disability categories under which a child can be found eligible for special education and related services. So those categories are all on the slide here. And if you want to learn more about these disabilities and how they are defined, you can find parent-friendly descriptions at this link that I'm going to put in the chat when I find the button. Just one moment. Oh, that's the emoji button. Michelle or Jill, can you tell me how I can get to the chat? I thought I had all of my parts ready to go.
It's at the bottom to the right.
I see the speaker and the camera, the presentation.
It's way, way to the right is the chat feature.
Oh my goodness.
On the bottom.
Yeah. I don't have it. Okay.
You might have to minimize or shrink your screen down. It may be covering your screen, maybe actually covering it.
Yeah, maybe if you want to stop sharing and then you can look. I mean, I don't know, whatever works for you. I'm not sure how your screen looks.
Yeah, I see my raise hand. You know what though? We're going to go ahead and keep going through this because I have That's so odd. I do have the link in the end of our presentation. So I will just, you guys will be able to look at it there. But the Parent Center Hub is our national version of InSource. So our National Parent Training and Information Center is called the Parent Center Hub is their website, and they have just parent-friendly descriptions of all of the different eligibility categories and kind of what is the criteria to determine eligibility. But you can look into that if you'd like. Like I said, that'll be linked at the end of the slides at the end of this presentation today, which I'll have. The reason that I wanted to share that is because if you are a parent requesting an evaluation for special education and related services, you're going to want to let the school know what eligibility category, or maybe there's multiple categories that you would like your student to be evaluated for. So these are the options that they can use. All right. Before a child's eligibility for special education and related services can be determined, we have to conduct a full and individualized evaluation of the child. There are two ways that we can begin this process, and that is either with a parent request or with a school request. So parents can always make a request for an evaluation, and you can do that either verbally or in writing. And often schools will like you to submit that in writing so that we have kind of a paper trail of when that request was made, but you are allowed to make a verbal request for an evaluation. Parents, you guys are often the first to notice that your child's learning or behavior or development may be a cause for concern. So if you're worried about your child's progress and maybe that they're not making improvements the way you would expect, or maybe even if they have new or different help at school, different supports at school, but they're still not making progress, then those might be some situations where you can call or email or write a letter to your child's teacher, always your school principal, or you can also ask your director of special education in your school district. But really, anybody who is a staff at the school, you can ask that request of. So one important thing to note is that request for an evaluation is different from a consent, which we're going to talk about in just a moment here. So once you make a request for an evaluation, they may ask for your consent later on. Also, if you are maybe a parent of a homeschooled child, or you've decided to enroll your child in a private school, you can still request an evaluation from your local school district for those special education and related services. Okay, so that is one way a parent can request that evaluation. The other option is that sometimes the school might also make those kinds of observations, and they can request an evaluation of a student that they suspect has a disability. And when they initiate that process at the school, then the school has to have parental consent to move forward. They have to have your permission. So the school is going to share that teacher recommendation, maybe some observations that led them to make that observation or to make that recommendation. They might give you the results of some tests that were given to maybe everybody in a particular grade, but that had kind of signaled that maybe further testing is needed. But they're going to give you that information. And then that way you can provide consent for that evaluation to move forward. So again, that school must ask for your permission as the parent to evaluate your child, and you as a parent have to be able to give your informed written permission before that evaluation can be conducted. So before the school can proceed with that evaluation, parents must give their consent, like I just said, and that consent is for the evaluation only. It doesn't mean that the school has your permission as a parent to provide services to that child. That is a separate consent that you would get later on. Okay, but this is a consent to move forward with testing. And if as a parent you do refuse to consent for that evaluation, or maybe you just don't even respond, that's okay too. The school is going to just document those attempts to obtain your consent for the evaluation, and generally the process will stop there because, like I said, we need your permission to move forward. If the school really truly believes that an evaluation is absolutely necessary, and as a parent you have not provided consent, then there is a method called due process procedures that the school can go through. But really, quite often, we do try to support your student where they are at and add interventions. If we don't have your consent, generally we don't move forward. Okay. So once you've made that request, after you go to the school and request that evaluation to take place, then the school is going to take your request and they have 10 instructional days to respond. So instructional days are school days. And if your student is eligible for special education, then you'll learn that there are some timelines involved, and oftentimes they are separated into instructional days or school days, or they might be calendar days, which include Saturday and Sunday, days that school's not in session. But for this one right here, we're looking at 10 school days that the school has to respond with a written notice, regardless if that request was made by you verbally or in writing. And if the school agrees with you that that evaluation is needed, then they are going to go ahead and move forward with evaluating your child at no cost to you. So during that time, the team is going to complete a review of any existing data that they have for the child already. That might be your kiddo's classwork, their performance on statewide or district-wide assessments like the I Read or I Learn. Maybe your student participates in iReady or other kinds of district-wide assessments. So we'll take all of that data, and then there will also be any information that you submit as parents that they would take into consideration. So if you bring that request for an evaluation with some other documentation, then they'll look at that too. And in that 10 days, they're going to determine whether they're moved forward with the evaluation or not. So just remember, unless the parent consents to an evaluation, the school is not required to conduct an evaluation. All right, so a couple other things that's important to know from Article 7. Remember, that's our state special education rules. But Article 7 requires the school to notify parents in writing when they would like to evaluate a child, or if the school refuses to evaluate that child after a parent has requested it. That's called giving prior written notice, because it's not enough for the school to just tell parents that they would like to evaluate your child or that they are refusing your request to evaluate your child. They need to do a couple other things also. And this is some language from Article 7, but basically the school needs to explain why it wants to conduct that evaluation or why it's refusing to conduct the evaluation. Okay, if they are going to move forward with that evaluation, they're going to describe what kinds of evaluation procedures, what kinds of assessments, records, reports, what are they using to propose that basis for the evaluation, or what of that kind of documentation did they use to make the decision to not evaluate your child. Okay. Either way, whether they move forward or not with the evaluation, there should also be information in this prior written notice, information of where you as parents can go to obtain help in understanding our Article 7 rules, and then also our federal IDEA special education legislation. Oftentimes, that might be your in-source crew right here that's available to help you. Also, what other options the school might have considered and why those were rejected, and then a description of any other factors that are relevant to the school's proposal to evaluate your child, or other factors that are relevant to them refusing to evaluate your child. Okay, so they're going to give you some information there. Essentially, this is why we're going to move forward, or this is why we're not going to move forward with the evaluation. And the purpose of this thorough explanation is to make sure that you as parents are fully informed, you understand what's being proposed, or you understand what's being refused. You understand what evaluation of your child is going to involve, or you're going to understand why the school is refusing to conduct the evaluation. And you should be able to understand your right to refuse that consent for evaluation, or what other rights you have in Article 7's procedural safeguards. So that is why they give you that letter. If you request an evaluation within 10 days, you will get a letter with the information about whether the school is going to move forward or not. Okay. One thing, since this will be some written communication from the school, this applies to this prior written notice and all of the documents afterward that we're going to talk about today. But all written communication from the school, including this initial notice, must be in a form that the general public can understand. So it shouldn't be filled with jargon and terms that are not understandable unless you're an educator, right? It must be provided in the parent's native language if they do not speak English, or in the mode of communication that they normally use, such as Braille or large print or sign, unless that is clearly not feasible to do so. If the parent's native language or other mode of communication is not a written language, then the school must take steps to ensure that that notice is translated orally or by other means like sign to parents in that native language or other mode of communication. The school needs to take steps to make sure that parents understand the content of that notice and that there is written evidence that those two requirements have been met. So the school needs to document that. So if you are a parent that maybe your native language is not English, these documents should be translated so that you are able to understand them as well. Okay, so that is all the steps thinking about the request for evaluation. So now we're going to talk about that evaluation process itself. So there are a couple different types of evaluation that you see on the screen here. And the initial evaluation of a child is what's required by Article 7 before any special education and related services can be provided to a student. The purposes of conducting this evaluation are pretty straightforward. We want to see if that student is a child with a disability according to our definitions in Article 7. We also want to gather information that will help determine the child's educational needs. And third, we want to guide our decision making about what is the appropriate educational programming for that child. And there's a couple other types of evaluation that may need to be completed depending on your child's unique circumstances. So we're going to talk about reevaluation, expedited evaluation, and independent educational evaluation also. Okay, so that initial evaluation, the first time that we're looking into this information to determine if your child has a disability, that is going to be on a 50 instructional day timeline. So 50 school days. If we're thinking about now here in April, 50 days doesn't seem like too long, but 50 school days, we're probably thinking into next school year, depending on your school's calendar. So they are a little bit of a lengthy process, and that is so that we can get a very full picture of what the student knows and is able to do, what their needs are. But that 50 instructional days starts at your signed parental consent date. So when the school sends that notice after 10 instructional days saying that, yes, we're going to move forward with that evaluation, you as a parent are going to provide your consent to do that. And that is when the timeline starts. If you as a parent were the one that requested the evaluation, they'll send you that notice within 10 days. If the school was the one that noticed, then they're just going to send this request for consent to you. So there won't be an additional 10 days. They will just send this request to evaluate that prior written notice. And then if you sign at that time, that is when the calendar starts. There are also situations where we would want to expedite an evaluation, and this is in situations where if the student has not yet been determined eligible for special education and related services, and they are engaging in behavior that maybe violates a rule or code of conduct of the school, then at that point we may assert the protections provided in Article 7 if the school had knowledge that the student might have been a student with a disability. So they haven't been tested yet, but you as a parent maybe expressed some concern in writing to your child's teacher or a principal Maybe a teacher of your child has told you that your child might need some special education and related services. Maybe you've requested an initial evaluation in the past, or maybe you've had school staff expressing specific concerns about some pattern of behavior that was demonstrated by the student. So if you guys have had those kinds of conversations and now your student is maybe being suspended or expelled or placed in a different and interim alternate educational setting, then at that point, we would conduct an evaluation in an expedited manner. And that expedited evaluation means that the school is going to conduct the evaluation and have the case conference committee meet within 20 instructional days. So a much shorter timeline. We went from 50 to 20, okay? And the school will provide the parent with a copy of that evaluation at that case conference committee meeting so we can make decisions and move forward, thinking about what is best for the child there. Okay, I saw a comment come up, so I know that comments are happening, but I still can't see them. It went away.
Yes, we do have. I'll read it to you if you don't mind. It
Oh,
says,
perfect.
it's from Delana, and she says, I had a parent this week advise that when the written notice IEP is translated into the parent's native language, and she has Arabic in parentheses, it is understandable. She said they use Google to translate, and there are other methods the school can use to translate, so that is understandable. Or is the best practice via Power School?
That is your local decision to make. So if using the Google Translate works best for you, then that is okay. That is okay. Not every language is in special programs, so we might need to use resources outside of that. But if Google Translate is working well for you and you've got it going there, then that is okay.
And that's the only one that we have in the box.
Okay. Next time I see one come up, I might try to click on it and see if it opens up somewhere. Okay, so looking at some more types of evaluations, we also have reevaluations and independent educational evaluation. So a reevaluation, it happens once your student already has an IEP. That isn't necessarily the end to your student's evaluation journey. Sometimes it is important to go back and collect additional information, whether maybe your student is just getting older and we want some updated data to plan around, or maybe there are additional concerns that come up as your student gets older, and maybe we are concerned about additional eligibilities or different eligibility categories. That can happen in different kinds of situations. So every 3 years, we need to consider a reevaluation as a case conference committee. So once your child has an IEP, about 3 years later in your case conference committee meetings, that conversation will come up. And if the parent and the school believe that it's unnecessary to do a new evaluation, then that's not necessary. We can just keep moving forward with the information that we have. As a middle school educator, I can tell you that a lot of my students, when I was in the classroom, they were evaluated in elementary school. And as we prepared to move towards high school, even if we weren't looking at a different eligibility area, it was good to have updated information, because if they were evaluated maybe in second, third grade, and we're using that data to inform our decisions about an eighth grader or moving into high school, sometimes it can just be valuable to get that extra information and updated data. So that is a case conference committee decision that is documented in the IEP. It's not required, but it is available at least once every 3 years to reevaluate. All right, and then the last type of evaluation here is an independent educational evaluation. So if your student has been evaluated either in that initial evaluation, the expedited evaluation, or the reevaluation, then you have the right as a parent to obtain that independent educational evaluation, or you might see it referred to as an IEE. And this type of evaluation means that it's conducted by a qualified examiner, but they are not employed by the school that's responsible for the education of your child. They're not employed by the school. So if you ask for that IEE, then the school has to give you some information about where you can obtain that independent educational evaluation. And in most situations, those evaluations are provided at no cost to you. The results of that independent evaluation have to be considered by the school in any decision made with respect to providing your child with a free and appropriate public education. So if you're disagreeing with the results, maybe you go through that initial evaluation and the school determines that they're not eligible due to this, this, and this, and you disagree with that, you can just say, hey, I would like to go ahead and request an independent educational evaluation, and the school will give you some information about who you can contact to move forward with that process. Okay. So thinking about your evaluation team, who are the people that are doing all of this evaluating that we're talking about? And that is your multidisciplinary team is what they're called. So this multidisciplinary team is a group of qualified individuals, and that includes at least one teacher that is licensed in or has a special knowledge of the area of your student's suspected disability. We're also going to have a school psychologist. In most situations, we might not have that if you are requesting a developmental delay evaluation, a language impairment evaluation, or a speech impairment evaluation, but we would have other evaluators in those situations. For language impairment and speech impairment, a speech language pathologist will join that team. Okay. For our students that maybe we suspect that they have a specific learning disability in the area of reading or math, then we want to have the student's general education teacher if the student is in general education classes. Okay. If you have an early childhood kiddo, maybe in the ages of 3 to 5, we want to have an individual who holds an appropriate license to teach that early childhood special education class. And if you have a child who is blind, has low vision, is deaf or hard of hearing, or is suspected of having multiple disabilities, then the school is going to request that representatives of those state-operated schools, the Indiana School for the Deaf or the Indiana School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, would also join that team. So those are all the people on your multidisciplinary team to complete the evaluation. Okay. And this slide just shows a little bit about the scope of the evaluation. What is it that we're looking at when we are completing that evaluation to determine eligibility? So all of this information is here, but one thing that's really important to hear and remember is that every child's initial evaluation must be full and individualized, focused on that child and only that child. It is a long-standing provision of both our IDEA federal rules and our Article 7 state rules that the evaluation of a child is more than just a child sitting in a room. Okay, it's individualized, and we focus only on that one child to complete that evaluation. Okay, so how the child performs on things like I learn, I read, other kind of state tests, and then also district-wide tests, is that information can be useful to contribute to the educational evaluation, because we want to look at how your student is doing compared to maybe grade level expectations or non-disabled peers. But that is not enough to diagnose a disability or determine what, if any, special education and related services your child might need. It doesn't give us enough information to plan for an appropriate educational program for the child. So we use more than just those statewide and district-wide tests, okay? We want to use a variety of assessment tools and strategies that gather relevant information about functional skills, developmental skills, academic skills, also information that's provided by you as a parent. If you have If you have information that you would like to share, maybe you have a family doctor that has shared information about a medical diagnosis that would be important for the school to be aware of, or maybe you have outside counseling that you choose to go to as a family that maybe you have some notes from there that is important to share. The school will take any information that you would like to share with them as part of this evaluation. Okay. And we'll talk about some things that they'll send home so that they get some baseline information for you in just a moment. Um, so when we conduct this evaluation, it's important that we examine all areas of a child's functioning to determine not only if that child is a child with a disability, but also determine what needs they have so we can support that. So all of these things on the slide here are included in that individualized evaluation. Our Article 7 rules are kind of down here at the bottom, but they state that educational evaluations must be sufficiently comprehensive to identify all of the students' special education and related service needs, whether or not those needs are commonly linked to the disability category that has been classified. Okay, so that's an important one to remember, because oftentimes, groups of students with the similar eligibility category will have similar needs, similar supports, similar accommodations, but every student is individualized. So they have individualized needs, and just because they have a certain eligibility maybe at the end of this evaluation does not mean that we plug and play a list of supports for that student. We look very individually at what the student needs once this evaluation is completed. Okay, so let's look at those materials. Our evaluations must use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to get this comprehensive information. And that has also been one of the cornerstones of Article 7, our state rules evaluation requirements. Under Article 7, it is inappropriate and unacceptable to base any eligibility decision upon the basis of just one procedure. We don't give out eligibility determinations based on one procedure, because that alone will not give a comprehensive picture of how a child performs or what he or she knows or does not know. We have to collect data through a variety of approaches, like observations of that student in different environments, interviews, tests. Maybe there are some curriculum-based assessments and some other things like that. We also want to look at some different sources. We want to talk to parents. We want to talk to teachers. We want to talk to specialists. We absolutely want to talk to the child. And all of that will give us an adequate picture of your child's strengths and weaknesses. Article 7 also requires schools to use technically sound instruments and processes in the evaluation. So technically sound instruments generally refer to assessments that have been shown through research to be valid and reliable. Those technically sound processes require that assessments and other evaluation materials be administered by trained and knowledgeable personnel. They have to be administered in accordance with any instructions provided by the producer of the assessments, and they're used for the purposes for which those assessments or measures are valid and reliable. We are using vetted resources by trained personnel to make sure that we get the accurate data about your child when we are going through this evaluation process. And then in addition to that, while we're using a variety of sound tools and processes, assessments must include those that are tailored to assess specific areas of your child's educational needs. So maybe we're looking at reading, maybe we're looking at math. It kind of depends on the student, but we're not looking at assessment tools that are designed to just give us maybe a single IQ to determine if a student is eligible. So, altogether, all of this information can be used to determine whether your child has a disability and whether they're eligible as a student to receive special education and related services. It also tells us the specific nature of your child's specific needs and whether that child needs special education and related services. And then that will tell us if we need to design a individualized program for that student. Okay, so as we move through this process, like I said, we want to have information from parents to get a full picture of what the child knows and can do. So, a couple of different pieces for you guys, parent responsibilities. While we go through this evaluation process, we want information from you. So, anything that you would like to provide as a parent, we will take that as part of the evaluation, but some things might get sent home to you, forms for you to fill out also. So you don't have to worry about writing up a narrative letter with all of the information that you want to share. Some of it might be able to be shared here in the rating scales and social and developmental history. So the rating scale, it's a questionnaire. If you went to school in the ages of Scantrons, I feel like they remind me of the Scantron. There's a lot of bubbles to fill in, kind of telling us, do you see these behaviors or these different things, just depending on your child and what area you're looking at. Do you see that? Maybe never, almost never, sometimes, always, almost always. That should be before always. But it'll give you those options to fill out for lots of different questions about your child. And then oftentimes teachers will also have a rating scale that's similar, but maybe looks at what a teacher would see at school. So that is one thing that might come home for you to fill out. And then the second thing here you'll see is that social and developmental history. This is really looking at your students' development. Really, since you found out you were having a child until now, they ask questions, related to milestones. As your student was, born, learning how to crawl, learning how to walk, did all of that happen on time, all the way through whatever age they are right now. So, lots of information that you can share using both of these. It is an individualized evaluation, so you might see some other pieces come home to you, but these are pretty standard to see come home. All right, and then these are just some of your rights as a parent. So we've been talking a lot about what this process is. So here's some of your rights along the way. So the first one here is that once this evaluation has been completed, all of the information from all of the different people that gathered information will come together in one evaluation report, and that should be made available to you. But you can request a copy of that, and you can also request a meeting with somebody from the school who's qualified to explain those results. And that should cost you nothing. So you should get a copy of the evaluation report, and then you can meet with a member of the school to explain that report to you. And this can be helpful depending on kind of your understanding of evaluations and the document that's there. When my son was first evaluated, I read through that initial evaluation report, and I was confused at the time. I was just an English teacher. I was not a special educator, and there was a lot of information in there that I didn't understand. So making that call, sitting down with somebody at the school so that they could break down all that information was really helpful, because after that, you're going to sit down with the team of evaluators, okay, and you're going to determine whether that child was eligible for special education related services and if we should develop an IEP. So if you're comfortable with that document before you go into that decision-making meeting, it'll help you be able to prepare and participate more if you're comfortable with that. So not everybody needs somebody to explain those results, but if you get that copy ahead of time and you have confusion, definitely request a meeting to explain those initial evaluation results. Okay. You can also do that as a part of a reevaluation, an expedited evaluation. You can ask somebody to explain that report to you. All right. So that's the first one. Second right that you have as a parent is you have the right to participate in the eligibility decision-making process because you are a member of the case conference committee who makes decisions and determinations about the student moving forward. So that does not mean that your decision is the only one that counts. It does not mean that there's a vote and with the majority rules in these decisions. Determining eligibility and other decisions that your case conference committee will make are built upon consensus. So a decision that everybody on the team can live with. Okay. But you have the right to participate in that decision-making process. Okay. And then the third right here is if you disagree with the findings of that evaluation, you have the right to request that independent educational evaluation. So we talked about that a couple slides ago, but just as a reminder, an independent educational evaluation or an IEE, that's the evaluation that's conducted by a qualified evaluator who is not employed by the school that is responsible for educating your child, but they are qualified to deliver that evaluation. And when they complete that independent educational evaluation, the school must consider that information to determine eligibility. Okay, so that's a little bit about your responsibilities, filling out those forms, sharing information, a little bit of information about your rights and some next steps that you can take if you disagree with some things. So let's talk about eligibility now, because that's really the next step. Once that evaluation has been completed, that report should be made available to you. Like I said, you might request a meeting to go over what was in there, but that wasn't always the case. Really, in the past, parents were not always included in that group decision making to determine their child's eligibility. And in fact, they were often excluded from those meetings and not allowed to participate. But IDEA, our federal special education rules, they were amended in 1997. And they said that at that point in 1997, parents are allowed to be part of the group that determines their child's eligibility. And they are also been required to be provided a copy of that educational evaluation report. So schools are going to hold that meeting to determine eligibility based on the results in this evaluation report. You can request that meeting, make sure you're really comfortable with it. And also the specialists who assessed your child, they should be able to explain what they did in those evaluation processes, why they used the test that they did, what your child's results were on those tests or other evaluation procedures, and what the scores in that report mean when we compare those scores to other children in the same grade or at the same age. So those are some things that will be discussed in this meeting. Okay. Once those results have been reviewed, the team is going to determine if the student is eligible for special education and related services based on those results of the evaluation. So eligibility requires that a disability or impairment adversely affects the student's educational performance. So that is one requirement here. Okay. If your student has a developmental delay, that's another piece that's right here. That might be another consideration if you have an early childhood kiddo or a younger kiddo. Okay. In order for a disability to adversely affect, it has to have a consistent and significant negative impact on academic performance and or functional performance. So it can be one or the other or both. That adverse effect is prevalent and we can notice it over time. So I'm going to go back real quick here. To determine eligibility, we have to determine that the disability or impairment adversely affects our students' educational performance. Okay, and that adverse effect has to be a consistent and significant negative impact on your child's academic or functional performance. So it's important to know that that group may not determine that a child is eligible if the determinant factor in making that judgment is if a child has had a lack of instruction in reading or a lack of instruction in math or if the child has limited English proficiency. Okay, so those are some reasons that we would not determine a child eligible. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and just say that does not mean that if your student has limited English proficiency, they cannot also have an IEP. That just cannot be the only reason that we would implement an IEP, is because the child has limited English proficiency. There has to be that adverse educational effect. Okay. So having a disability also does not necessarily make a child eligible for special education. So a child with a disability, according to IDEA, means that a child was evaluated as having one of those disabilities that I listed at the beginning, those 13 eligibility categories. So they've been evaluated and they have one of those disabilities that's listed, and by reason thereof need special education and related services. So that provision includes the very important phrase of by reason thereof. And that means that because of the disability, the child needs special education and related services. And the reason we bring this up is because that many children have disabilities that do not bring with them the extra need for educational assistance or individualized educational programming. If a child has a disability, but they're not eligible under IDEA, our federal rules, or Article 7, our state rules, they might be eligible for protections afforded by other laws, like Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So you might have heard of a 504 plan. It's not uncommon for a child to have a 504 plan at school to address those kind of disability-related educational needs. And those they might need assistance, but not under IDEA. So our office doesn't really provide feedback or advice on 504s, but one way to kind of think about and separate this is that sometimes students need some accommodations, and that's it. Maybe so for my son, when he was evaluated, he did not end up being eligible for an IEP, but we did move forward with the 504 because he didn't need the services. He didn't need a person to come alongside him and support him academically or functionally, but he does need accommodations. He needs a quiet testing environment. Sometimes he needs extra time to complete tests, things like that. So those are in his 504 plan, and since he didn't need the services, he did not qualify for an IEP. So, even if your child has a disability, there might be other plans out there if the IEP is not the one to move forward with. Okay. All right, like I said, I do always want to end our session. I want to leave some time for questions and also make sure that I can give you guys some resources. So some of the things that you'll see on here, we have Article 7. That is our state special education rules. So everything that we talked about today is the coded language is all in there for you. But if maybe a big, long legal document is not the way you best take in information, InSource has worked with us to provide this Navigating the Course document. It's a companion guide to Article 7 and has more parent-friendly language that describe what is in Article 7. So that is available to you. All right. The next thing we have here is our notice of procedural safeguards that include your rights and responsibilities as parents. So this should be given to you at least once a year during case conference committee meetings. If you request an evaluation, these procedural safeguards should be delivered to you a couple other times. But those are right here. This top link is in English, and then also there are 10 of the other most popular language translations are available on the link below that. And then we've been really trying to develop some different 1 or 2 page documents, shorter documents to describe some of the pieces of the special education process. So I wanted to make sure to share the one that we created over educational evaluations. Also, we have a lot of questions come up sometimes about autism because there is a medical diagnosis that you might receive from a doctor's office or somewhere else. And then there's also the educational eligibility, which is different. And just because your student has a medical diagnosis of autism does not mean that they will have a special education eligibility of autism and an IEP. So there's a document here to kind of explain the difference between those two. Also, a spread the word all about developmental delay. If you've got a younger kiddo that you have questions about that. We touched just a little bit on educational evaluation of English learners, but that is a nuanced topic. A lot of the pieces of this presentation, there are extra considerations if your student is an English learner or if the family is an English learners. So you can read some more about that here, and definitely ask me questions if you have them. And then also, like I said, our National Parent Training and Information Center, our federal version of our wonderful state in-source Parent Training and Information Center, they have just this resource here about evaluating our school-age children for disability. So those are our resources. I just want to thank you for your time today. We have 9 minutes left, and I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
I just want to thank you. This was very thorough.
Oh, thank you, Diane. That's big kudos coming from a school psychologist. I love that.
We have not had any more questions posted in our chat box.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting right now. But I will stay on in case anybody has any questions. I'm so happy to join you guys. I'll be here next month talking a little bit about preventing the summer slide. So if you are thinking about some academic activities that are fun that families can participate in together, that is what we will be talking about next month.
Maggie, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. It is great information that you brought to us and some clarity. I do just have one question, if you don't mind me asking a question.
Yeah.
When we talk about getting those evaluations and having them explained to us as a parent, I know in Article 7 it talks about that initial case conference. So what would you recommend? What would you say if sometimes we have parents that want those explained to them before case conferences, and it's just a reevaluation. And I know there's been some pushback at times with some of the parents that I've worked with that the schools, really dug their heels in and said, we don't have to do that because that's only allowed at an initial. But being on the side of receiving that, sometimes it's really emotional and it's hard to process that information sitting in a case conference. So what would you recommend if we had a parent that said they're receiving that pushback and not wanting to have that in advance and explain to them?
Well, I would say, so I did mention that, and it is only required in Article 7 for initial evaluations, but in order to fully participate as a case conference committee member, you need to be able to understand the information that's being discussed. So that is where, as a parent, I would come back and request that again and say, as a case conference committee member, you cannot fully participate until you have all of the information, and that will, I would hope that would help make the school a little bit more amenable to supporting that.
Thank you so very much for re-explaining that, because that's sometimes a real hurdle to get past with some of the parents and get to the schools to have that. So thank you again.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it really is, it falls on, I believe, the shoulders of the school psychologist or whoever's, or the speech and language pathologist who's coordinating that evaluation, to make sure that the parent does have what they need to participate in that case conference. And, if you're always talking to the administration, and I know some psychologists who would push back on this, that not everybody views their job like I did, but it really does fall back on their shoulders. They should strive in every way possible to meet the needs of those parents.
I agree. And I do
I just wanted
respect
to thank
the,
you.
oh no, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Maggie, because I always like to, obviously, um, a lot of us here are from in-source, and we go through that Article 7 a lot. We talk to a lot of parents, but I always like to say, okay, if I was that parent that is just beginning to understand what all this is about, I really appreciated the information that you gave, because it was, put into little sections and it's understandable. So I always put myself in that position of like, well, what kind of information, or how would I like that to be presented if I was a first time, mom of a child with, a disability? And when I have to start this process, what does it mean? Because it's a lot. It's overwhelming for them. And so thank you. And I hope a lot of parents, if they watch it now or later, that they can get something from this. But thank you for being here, Maggie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, we still haven't had any questions posted. Again, Maggie, thank you so much for being here today. I really, really appreciate it. And our staff appreciates it. And all of those of you that are here that are not staff, thank you so very much for being here. Again, Maggie will be back here next month. And Michelle is going to be taking over on next month. She will be the host for our meetings for next month, and she will also be doing them next year. Okay. So thank you very much. And I don't see any questions at this time. So again, Maggie, thank you very much for everything that you've done today. Greatly appreciate the information, and we are looking forward to seeing you next month. Would you please remind us again what you will be here for next month?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about it's the presentation is called Preventing the Summer Slide, and summer slide is just that academic loss of skills that happens as our students are not in school for those weeks over the summer. So, what are some things that you guys can do as families, as parents with your kiddos to keep them learning, keep them engaged in the educational process, but also have fun because it's summer, and that's important too, to rest and reset. So we'll talk about some of that.
I would say snacks. I'm just going to pitch in right now. I would say lots of snacks.
Yes, absolutely. My grocery budget looks very different in July than it does in August.
Yes. I think my son can go through like blueberries like there's no tomorrow. But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, ladies, for being here today, and we will look forward to seeing everyone next month. And everyone have a great day. And again, Maggie, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.